Peace be upon you. Some of you might be familiar with the movie Ocean's 11, and I think it sets a good foundation for what we're going to talk about. So, if you're not familiar with the movie, the premise is you got a couple characters and they're trying to conduct a heist. And what they want to do is take money from a casino. So, they meticulously plan how they're going to carry out this heist. And in order to be successful, they're constantly thinking about ways that the plan could fail and coming up with contingencies and figuring out who they need for certain portions of the plan. And they're meticulously planning this entire thing to make sure that they're successful, that they're steps ahead of the casino owner. And what this reminds me of is the fact that, when they came to take on this plan, they didn't just go there with wishful thinking. They didn't just show up and say, "Hey, we'll wing it," and figure things out along the way. They meticulously planned ahead of time. They practiced. They rehearsed. They thought about all these backup plans that could happen in case things go awry. And it shows that they were very deliberate about what they were doing. But so much in our life, we kind of don't take that same level of seriousness, especially when it has to do with our salvation. We think that, hey, we're submitters, we're believers, we believe in God. Yeah, we sin, but, of course, we're going to make it to heaven. God is most gracious, most merciful. And this kind of thinking, this kind of mentality, God calls wishful thinking, and it's actually a great recipe for disaster. In chapter 7, verse 46, it reads, "A barrier separates them while purgatory is occupied by people who recognize each side by their looks. They will call the dwellers of paradise, peace be upon you. They did not enter paradise through wishful thinking." And in 57:13, the header is "the worst losers," and it reads, "On that day, the hypocrite men and women will say to those who believe, 'Please allow us to absorb some of your light.' It will be said, 'Go back behind you and seek light.' A barrier will be set up between them, whose gate separates mercy on the inner side from retribution on the outer side. They will call upon them, 'Were we not with you?' They will answer, 'Yes, but you cheated your souls, hesitated, doubted, and became misled by wishful thinking until God's judgment came. You were diverted from God by illusions.'" And consistently we're seeing this aspect that, people who had wishful thinking that, hey, we're just going to go to heaven just because we believe in God and we believe in heaven, it's a great way to kind of just fail. We have to be strategic. We have to plan. We have to prepare. We have to think about contingencies in case things go awry, just like the characters in Ocean's 11. And if we're not captains of our destiny, we're prisoners of our wishful thinking. And wishful thinking, by de facto, what it means is that we think just because we have a certain belief or a thought that this is how reality is going to play out. And it's as mentioned, it's a recipe for disaster. And there's tons of these studies that, people, when they think a certain way, they just assume that reality is going to play out that way. And when they find out that reality doesn't play out the way that they imagine, they're frustrated, and then it becomes, kind of a nightmare, a disaster situation. They become despondent and hopeless. And one of the ways to circumvent wishful thinking and the pitfalls of wishful thinking is by being cognizant of what the end goal is, right? And they saw that, when people were faced with reality, in the sense that, hey, look, things can go awry, the plan you thought you had in place is actually not going to play out that way, that people became more practical in their expectations. And for us, one of the blessings of being a believer is that we're cognizant that on the day, there's going to be a day our life is going to come to an end. And then there's going to be a day of judgment where all our deeds are going to be held accountable. And because of that, it's going to put a sense of reality to us, making us allowed to think for, hey, these events that, we're going through each day, how am I, in essence, positioning myself to be successful? By being aware of the hereafter, being aware of Judgment Day, being aware that, hey, look, all our accounts are going to be laid out before us, and those are what we're going to be judged by. Hopefully, it's going to shake us out of this aspect of wishful thinking. In 15:2 it reads, "Certainly those who disbelieved will wish they were submitters. Let them eat, enjoy, and remain blinded by wishful thinking. They will find out." In 2:11 it reads, "Some have said no one will enter paradise except Jews or Christians. Such is their wishful thinking. Say, show us your proof if you're right." This is common among certain sects where they think that just because they're Christians or Jews or some other religion, that they're automatically guaranteed paradise. And this is nothing more than wishful thinking. So how do we know if we're taking this seriously? How do we know that we're not falling into this trap of wishful thinking? And again, to the point of Ocean's 11, do we have a strategy? Are we setting out a roadmap for how we're planning on being successful? And a simple definition of strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve a major overall aim. And what we're going to go over is 7 steps to a solid strategy. And this is obviously in regards to our salvation and the Quran and pleasing God. But technically, you can apply these 7 steps to just about any strategy we're going after. So the first step in a good strategy is having strategic intent, a compelling vision of the future that compels action. And this has to do, again, with realizing what is our aim, what is our end goal, what is it that we're trying to achieve. And this concept of realizing that, look, on some day we're going to pass and there's nothing that's going to, after that fact, that's going to affect us, that everything we lay out in this life is going to determine the rest of our eternity. And there's a quote, I think it comes from Wayne Dyer, but I'm not sure where he got it from. It says, remember, the last coat you wear won't need any pockets. Meaning that there's nothing in this world we're going to be taking with us. Our jobs, our title, our cars, our money, our these luxuries that we have, they're all vanities, and nothing of that we're going to be able to take with us to the hereafter. The only thing that's going to matter is our righteousness. What good deeds did we lay out for us? So our strategic intent is to say, hey, we want to make it to heaven and we want to please God. That's our intent. And realizing the only thing that we're going to carry with us to the hereafter is our good deeds. So the second step after strategic intent is study. And if you think about, say, for instance, football players, anywhere from high school, college, professional, one thing that they spend a lot of their time doing is studying film. And what they're doing is they're watching the way that they play, they watch their competition, understanding how they play, to make sure that they're well prepared. And we have to do the same thing. We have to continuously kind of like study ourselves, our competitors, and realize, okay, how can we, in essence, position ourselves to be successful? It'd be very naive to think that, hey, we're just going to show up, not understand our competitors, and expect that, we're going to be able to win. So who are the players in our game? So the first one is obviously ourselves. We have to know ourselves. And God tells us in the Quran that it's a commandment to examine ourselves. In 18:103 it says, shall I tell you who the worst losers are? They are those whose works in this life are totally astray, but they think that they are doing good. We have to be self-reflecting to think, are the works that we're doing in this world, are they going to be any benefit for us for a strategic intent in the hereafter? In 59:18 it says, oh, you believe, you shall reverence God, and let every soul examine what it has sent ahead for tomorrow. You shall reverence God. God is fully cognizant of everything you do. So the first player we have to analyze is ourselves. The second entity we have to analyze is our egos. Because each person is, unfortunately has an ego. And we have to realize, how does our ego play into this process? In 2:54 it says, recall that Moses said to his people, O my people, you have wronged your souls by worshiping the calf. You must repent to your Creator. You shall kill your egos. This is better for you in the sight of your Creator. He did redeem you. He is the Redeemer, most merciful. In 12:53, this is the governor's wife. She testifies. It says, I do not claim innocence for myself. The self, the ego, is an advocate of vice, except for those who have attained mercy from my Lord. My Lord is forgiver, most merciful. And one of the tricky aspects of the ego is that the ego can convince us of anything. Any of our actions we do, the ego can justify it for us. We're very easy to trick ourselves. One of the quotes I like is, the person was so clever he could convince himself of anything. And Richard Feynman said, the first principle is not to fool yourself, and you're the easiest one to fool. We're always going to have these confirmation bias, these biases that are going to put things into our favor. And we have to be cognizant of that. We have to think, okay, our ego is going to come up with an excuse to justify our bad deeds. How do we circumvent that? How do we basically plan against that? And that's the reality. Is everyone thinks that they're justified in their actions. Very few people are going to realize that, look, maybe I'm not that good of a person. Maybe I'm, when I behaved in that way, it wasn't in the best manner. We always have this tendency of being able to justify our actions, to say, hey, we weren't at fault. It was the other people. They just didn't understand our situation. We're so quick to be compassionate towards ourselves and our actions, and quick to, reprimand others for theirs. So we have to be cognizant of that. The third player in this equation is the devil. So in 35:6 it says, the devil is your enemy, so treat him as an enemy. He only invites his party to be the dwellers of hell. And just like anyone who's going into a competition, you need to study the competitors, right? Who is it that you're competing against with? Just like the football players study film to realize, okay, what are the plays, the offense, the defense of their competitors? We have to do the same. And, what are the tricks that the devil is going to basically lay before us to trick us? And one of the big aspects that has to do with self-control and willpower. Because if we have unlimited self-control and willpower, it'd be very easy to maintain righteousness. And the reality is, from all these studies is that, self-control and willpower, not only are they linked, but we have a limited supply, Eventually we're going to get worn out, we're going to give in. And God gives us the instructions on how to best, circumvent these pitfalls of lack of self-control, lack of willpower. It's to avoid the threat when possible. So this requires two elements. One is to understand where is it that we feel vulnerable? Under what circumstances can the devil get to us? Maybe it's around certain individuals or certain environments or certain, scenarios. And by being able to identify, okay, these are the points where I'm vulnerable, the simplest task is to avoid that. If you got a problem with drinking, don't go into a bar. You got a problem with gambling, maybe stay offline or don't go into a casino, because those are the areas you're going to be the most vulnerable. And they did a study. They had 2,000 people where they were randomly pinging them to see, if they felt like they were had to exert, self-control or willpower. And what they found out is the people who, quote unquote, had better self-control and willpower, they were in just less situations where they were tempted. And that's a very simple kind of reality is, look, if you don't want to fall into sin, stay away from scenarios where you're going to fall into sin. And by being cognizant of that, but being aware of that, knowing where our vulnerabilities are, we're going to be more likely to be successful. So after study and after strategic intent, the next thing is preparation. Benjamin Franklin had a quote that says, "By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail." And it's the same thing. Preparation is a commandment among the believers. We don't go through, our adversity and hardships through wishful thinking. We go through them through preparation. In 860, it says, "You shall prepare for them all the power you can muster and all the equipment you can mobilize, that you may frighten the enemies of God, your enemies, as well as others who are not known to you. God knows them. Whatever you spend in the cause of God will be repaid to you generously without the least injustice." And you think about this, in the past, the believers had to go to war. They didn't go to war with feathers, right? They didn't go to war unprepared. No, they planned, they strategized, they came well armed, they trained, right? They didn't just show up and say, "Oh, God's running everything, He's going to take care of the situation." No, there's a system that God has in place. And God says in the Quran repeatedly that God's system is unchangeable, right? God could easily eliminate our competition. God could easily, put us in a situation where we don't have to go through hardship or adversity. But if He was to do that, we wouldn't grow. So part of the process, the growth process, is that we have to prepare, we have to train. And there's a story from Mike Tyson. So Mike Tyson was going to go to a big fight, and at this point he had the championship, and everyone knew him, everyone watched all his fights, and I can't remember who he was competing against, but the reporter during an interview said, "Hey, Mike, how do you feel about this? This person has studied your every move. He's trained meticulously to fight just you. And you have no clue, while you train to fight all these people, this one person is trained only to fight you." And his response was awesome. He says, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." And that's the reality. It's like, look, we are going to have a plan, and still we are going to get punched in the face. So we have to understand, how do we handle defeat? How do we handle these moments when life is going to punch us in the face? And again, this is part of God's system. In 3:140 it reads, "If you suffer hardship, the enemy also suffers the same hardship. We alternate the days of victory and defeat among the people. God thus distinguishes the true believers and blesses some of you with martyrdom. God dislikes injustice." So this is part of God's system, that God alternates the days of victory and defeat in order to strengthen us, to bring out our true convictions. Those of us who haven't trained, haven't prepared, when all of a sudden adversity hits, we're going to become turn about face, turn the other way, run away from the truth, and basically abandon God. And it shows, what we're made of. So in order to overcome this inevitability of getting punched in the face, of alternating between victory and defeat, we need to be adaptable. And this means we have to be able to adjust ourselves to the circumstances. One of the quotes that says, "Things change. The only thing constant is change. It's up to us to be adaptable to that change." And there's an awesome story with Michael Phelps. So Michael Phelps, when his coach trained him for years since he was a youth. And one of the things that his coach would do is he'd constantly mess with him. He would, hide stuff, distract stuff. One time, apparently, I guess this was a common occurrence, he would like step on his goggles right before he was about to compete, to break them, to shatter them. So then to see how he reacts under these scenarios. And Michael Phelps got very comfortable with this level of ambiguity, this level of uncertainty when these last minute, instances come up, to the point that when he was competing in China, his goggles had a malfunction and they were getting water in them. He still won gold. And the reason being it's because he trained under those circumstances. A more interesting or funny use case is in the movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Bloodsport. So, Jean-Claude Van Damme would train with his blindfolded. So when Chung Lee poured sand into his eye, Jean-Claude Van Damme still was able to fight because he trained under those circumstances. And the reality is, like, look, we're going to hit turmoil. We're going to hit rough patches of sea. And the question is, how do we adapt to these scenarios? And one of the quotes I love, it says, "You can't control the winds, but you can adjust the sail." And this is a reality. We're going to come into our points in our life where we're going to hit turmoil. We're going to hit hardship, adversity. And there isn't anything we can do to change the environment, most likely. But what we can do is adjust the sails, right? We can adjust our behavior, our reaction to the environment. In 10:22, it reads, "He is the one who moves you across the land and sea. You get on ships, they sail smoothly in nice breeze. Then while rejoicing there in violent wind blows and the waves surround them from every side, this is when they implore God, sincerely devoting their prayers to Him alone. If you only save us this time, we will be eternally appreciative. But as soon as He saves them, they transgress on earth and oppose the truth. O people, your transgression is only to the detriment of your own souls. You remain preoccupied with this worldly life. Then to us is your ultimate return. Then we inform you of everything you had done." Right? So the reality is, like, look, we're going to hit rough patches of water, and there isn't anything we can do. The only thing we can do is we can plan, right? We can train, we can prepare, and we can become adaptable. And that's it. And if we have those ingredients, God willing, you'll be successful through the turmoil, because the reality is God controls everything. And God puts us in these situations to strengthen us, to bring us, to elevate us. And we have to trust in God. So the fifth step to having a good strategic plan is to have a concentration of force. And it's very tempting, when you get into submission, when you start reading the Quran, you want to apply everything, and that's good. But the reality is, like, look, until you can tackle one of your obstacles, you're not going to be able to be very effective at the next one. And when you look at people who, military strategists and stuff, they constantly say, look, if you spread yourself too thin, you're going to lose. And I'm going to revert to a clip, and this is from a book. Actually, so the person who put this together, it's on YouTube. It's Fight Mediocrity, and it's about a book. It's called The One Thing. So I'm going to play that, and then we'll get back to it.
So I remember finding out about personal development, and I thought it was just the greatest thing. I basically sucked at everything, but I realized, hey, I can improve whatever I suck at. And that's pretty cool, but I ran into a problem that almost everyone going through the same journey runs into, which is basically starting to want to improve everything. So it goes something like this. This is awesome. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to wake up early, meditate for an hour, go to the gym for 2 hours, go to work, and as soon as that's done, go to a martial arts class, come home and learn how to play the guitar because I've always wanted to play it, and once I'm done with that, I know it's really late, but I'm going to work on my 5 different business ideas. And that sounds so good because all of a sudden you're excited about life again. But here are the 2 most likely outcomes of that dream. The first, and the most likely one, is that you won't be able to actually do it. I don't care how great you think your willpower is, because willpower's like a battery. It gets drained. So when you start your day off trying to be the Dalai Lama, and then Ronnie Coleman, and then Anderson Silva, and then Jimi Hendrix, and finally at midnight You want to be Mark Zuckerberg, you won't be able to get to the Silva, Hendricks, and Zuckerberg point, if you even make it that far, because the battery is empty by then. The other option, and this is very unlikely, is let's assume a hypothetical situation where you somehow can manage and consistently get through all those things. In this unlikely scenario, the best outcome is that you'll still end up being average at everything. That's it, just average. So we're talking about success here in terms of how it's usually defined. We think of the Dalai Lama as a success at what he does. We think of Ronnie Coleman as a success at what he does. Same thing with Anderson Silva and Jimi Hendrix and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, if you look at all those people, what do they have in common? You don't see Mark Zuckerberg busting through his shirt. Why? Because if he dedicated his daily hours and focus to his workouts, he just wouldn't be Mark Zuckerberg. Same thing with Ronnie Coleman. If he's going to be up on the stage in 6 months, he's focusing on one thing, and that's his physique. He's not playing the violin while building awesome business websites. And all of that leads us to this idea of the one thing. Every person who we view as successful has the one thing that they focus on. If it's Mozart, it's the piano. It's not the piano plus hitting the gym and shooting a basketball for hours. If it's LeBron James, it's basketball. It's not basketball plus playing the piano and trying to compose for hours. Now, let me make this clear that I'm not here to define success for you. Your definition of success might be different than what's commonly accepted. Maybe for you, Mozart and LeBron James aren't successful. Maybe you like the idea of being okay at everything and having a more balanced lifestyle. And that's fine. I'm not here to tell you what you should do or how you should think. But if you're asking about how to be successful, and success is defined for you by someone like Mozart in music or LeBron James in basketball, you do have to realize that there's almost no balance with that kind of success. There just isn't.
Hope you guys like that clip. So the person who put that together has a number of summaries that he's done from really awesome books. Highly recommend to check them out. Again, it's Fight Mediocrity. So just to recap, the 7 steps so far for a good strategy is 1, strategic intent. 2 was study, 3 was preparation, 4 was adaptability, 5 was concentration of force, and the 6th step is resourcefulness. And one of the best examples of being resourceful is in David. And the concept of being resourceful is realizing that, look, you don't need infinite amount of resources to be able to get the job done. When you prepare, when you plan, when you strategize, you have to trust in God that God has given you everything you need to be successful. And the example of David is when he faced Goliath, one of many examples from David actually, that he was able to take down Goliath with nothing more than some rocks and a sling. And that's all it took from him to be able to give the children of Israel the morale to eliminate his enemy. But he didn't go into this blindly. He didn't go into this wishful thinking. And I'm going to read from 1 Samuel, this in the Bible, starting from verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him. You are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. Whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both the lions and the bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of the Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may my Lord be with you." And you see that, with nothing more than the training that he had raising sheep and the training he's done with the sling and the rocks, that he felt absolutely confident he can take down Goliath, and he was. So he didn't have wishful thinking. He was well prepared, and he was resourceful. He didn't say, "Hey, look, I need armor and I need 10 men and this and that." He knew that God has provided him with everything. And you see this same example with Moses. When Moses went to Pharaoh, God has already endowed him with everything he needed to be successful. He spent a life, in essence, training for that moment, unrealizing that that's what he was training for. And he was able to take down Pharaoh and his army with nothing more than a staff and the commandments from God. And I want to talk about one other scenario of someone who's just an amazing strategist. And this is Solomon. And the example is the Solomon when he engaged with the Queen of Sheba. So you think of this, Solomon gets word from the Hopu that, hey, there's a queen with a mighty palace and, kind of like tons of constituents who's worshiping the sun instead of God. And Solomon said, hey, I want to turn these people into submitters. So how do I go about doing that without, having to go to battle, having to fight, having to do anything other than, use my words, ink and paper. So he sends a note to the Queen of Sheba from the Hopu that says, come to me as submitters, knowing full well that they are going to interpret that not as submitters to God, but submitters to him, because the way they understand that message is they're saying, oh, this king, they're tyrants and they want to subjugate their people and, make people bow down to him. So they test Solomon by sending him a gift. And when Solomon gets this gift, he replies back and says, what you're giving me, and this is in 27:36, says, are you giving me money? What God has given me is far better than what he's given you. You're the ones who should rejoice in such gifts. So to the Hopu he said, go back to them and let them know that we will come to them with forces they cannot imagine. We will evict them humiliated and debased. In essence, he's letting them know that, making them think that they are going to go to battle, that he's going to basically come at them with all these forces and preparing and taunting, in essence, the Queen of Sheba and her people to go to battle with him. So knowing that that was the intent of the message, that they were going to interpret it that way, what does Solomon do? So Solomon actually lives up to every word he said. He says that he will come to them with forces they can't imagine, that he will evict them humiliated and debased. So Solomon had the jinns working for him. So these are forces that they can't imagine. He had them, the jinn, go and take the Queen of Sheba's palace and bring it back to his land. So he debased them. And when they came and they saw that, hey, this is my palace in Solomon's region, they realized that they were humiliated. It was kind of a prank, And this was what it caused for them to realize that, oh my God, Solomon's right. He doesn't want us to prostrate to him. He wants us to submit to God. And he was able to do this to turn the Queen of Sheba, turn her constituents into believers in God with nothing more than choice words, right? Ink and paper and sending the Hopu to deliver the message. And this shows amazing strategic ability. And it's the fact that Solomon was able to think so many steps ahead rather than just like on a very surface level saying, okay, you make one move, I make one move. Think of it in the sense of chess. He was looking at the board 10 moves deep when the Queen of Sheba was only looking at one play at a time. And because of that, he had a major advantage. And this takes us to the last element of a good strategy, and that's execution. Because the reality is you can have a phenomenal plan, but if you cannot execute on that plan, if you cannot bring it to fruition, it's pretty much meaningless. And again, Solomon's example is a good example of this, but I want to touch on another one, which is Joseph and his brothers. So to backtrack the story of Joseph, Joseph at the time had 10 brothers, and they turned against him. When he was a boy, they threw him into a well, left him for dead. He got sold into slavery. Then the governor's wife tried to seduce him, and he was thrown into prison. And then eventually got out of prison, and he became the highest-ranking children of Israel in all of Egypt, reporting directly to the Pharaoh at the time as the treasurer. So, number of years has gone by, and at this point, he's rationing out provisions to all the people who come to visit them. And one day, his 10 brothers show up, and they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. So he has a series of things that he's thinking about as far as how he can take advantage of the situation. So for one thing, he wants to know, okay, how's his father, Jacob? He wants to know how's his brother. So he had a younger brother named Benjamin. He wanted to know how he's doing because he wasn't part of the 10. He wanted to give word to these people without letting them on, and he also wanted to test his brothers to see have they changed. Do they have any remorse for what they've done to him? So what he does is he treats them incredibly well. He says, okay, you guys are 10 brothers, ask about his father. They finds out that his father is still living, and finds out that, okay, his other brother's full brother, Benjamin, is still doing fine. So he says, okay, I want to bring these people back. I want to bring back Benjamin. I want to give word to my father that I'm okay, but I don't need them. I don't want them to be aware of who I am, that I'm Joseph. I'm the brother that they left for dead. So what he does is he convinces them, says, "Hey, come back, bring your other brother. I'd love to meet him." And he puts basically all their goods that they were trading with Joseph back on their camels and sends them back. So when they get back to Jacob, they give the news to Jacob saying, "Hey, the treasurer in Egypt is super nice. He gave us all he treated us really well. He even gave our goods back. And all he's asking is for us to bring our brother, right, the next time we visit." And this is a clear indication to Jacob that, hey, this is Joseph. This isn't just some random dude who's being incredibly nice, that this is the prophecy that Joseph was supposed to fulfill. And Jacob knew that Joseph was always going to fulfill this prophecy because he believed and trusted in God. So the request was that he bring back Benjamin. So when he brings back Benjamin and they bring all the camels looking for additional goods, what he does is he places the king's cup into Benjamin's bag. And the intent was to see how do the brothers react to this situation. So he places the king's cup and says, okay, someone has stolen the king's cup, and they're accusing Joseph's brothers, and they say, hey, we're not liars or thieves. And he says, okay, what's the punishment for the liar if one of you is a thief? And their response was that you own that person. So this was the one piece that Joseph couldn't control. And this was the piece that it says that it was God's will to give Joseph back his brother. So when they look into each of the brothers' bags, they see that, oh, it's in Benjamin's bag, and he gets to keep Benjamin. And he sees, how do the brothers react to this situation? Are they just kind of like willy-dilly, like, oh, whatever, we lost Benjamin, no big deal, we didn't like him that much anyway, like they did to Joseph in the past? Or if they change? And what they see is the oldest brother, Reuben, says, hey, in the past we lost Joseph. I'm not leaving until we get our brother Benjamin back. And this is, in essence, is showing that at least Reuben has changed from the situation, that he doesn't see, the act that he did to Joseph as something that's just. So they go back, they tell Jacob the news, and Jacob realizes, no, this is Joseph, because he says, go back to Egypt, get your brother and get Joseph and come back in chapter 12. So when they go back, at that point, they realize that, oh, this is, not just some random treasurer. This was Joseph. This was the brother that they left for dead. And all this was executed so flawlessly. You look at everything that Joseph had to do. He was steps and steps ahead of everyone else. And this is a consistent theme that you see in the Quran. And it's an interesting observation, is that typically when the messengers, they're depicted in the Quran, they're thinking multiple steps ahead. They're not thinking just, okay, one thing, I'm going to do this and then see what happens. They're continuously thinking multiple steps ahead. And this shows real wisdom. And this is one of the blessings that God gives to believers, is wisdom. And it says in the Quran in chapter 2 that wisdom is one of the great treasures. It's better than gold and silver. And it's one of these things that if we're being strategic, if we trust in God, if we prepare, we study, we become adaptable, we're resourceful, we concentrate our forces, we execute. Did I miss anything? And I think that's it. Preparation, yeah. That we're going to be successful, and we'll learn from this situation. So God willing, we're going to end there. If you guys got comments or questions, please hit us up at QuranTalk@gmail.com or on at Twitter at TalkQuran. And until next time, peace and God bless.